sort of a general gist of the Galaricella beetle project is Galaricella beetles are two species, Galaricella pusilla and calmariensis.
Calmariensis, yep.
Okay. They're native to Europe, where loosestrife is native, and so they've been introduced here. They've been working on different research and rearing projects since the early to mid-90s. And so, since they're the native predators, basically, of loosestrife, we're raising them to help keep loosestrife in check. So, the larvae are what do most of the damage. They feed on the leaves and the stems, and the adults feed on the leaves as well. But as you'll see with the rearing project, most of the damage comes from the larvae. And the first instar larvae feed on the buds as well, so that sort of helps reduce the flowering and the seed production. When setting up your sites for a purple loosestrife collection, we definitely recommend flagging them in the late summer, early fall while they're still in flower, because they're a lot easier to ID at those times. But this time of year, if you haven't flagged them ahead of time, you can still look at the plant. There are some different characteristics that you can use to help ID. So one of the main things is that it has a squared off stem. So on some of the newer growth towards the top of the plant, look for more square stem edges, as you can see along here, and then further up as well. And it is important to look further up on the plant because the base of the stem does become rounded off as the plant gets older. Another thing to look for are, there are a few here, opposite branching leaves. There are a few shriveled little ones here. Or you can look for the buds where they come from the stems. Or also look for inflorescences. So purple loosestrife has these really spiky inflorescences, and the stems branch, but each one is still pretty separate with its own spike, as you can see. And then when digging the plant, we want ultimately about a softball size root crown. So not all of your plants will have roots that size, so it's okay to combine several into one pot, but that's ultimately about the mass of roots that you want. So once you have your plant, start digging maybe about 3 or 4 inches out from the base of the stem, just to make sure that you keep as much of the root as possible and don't wind up accidentally damaging any buds that it's already put out. So just take your shovel, put it around, and pry up a little bit. You may have to work around the plant just to loosen it up. They do have very woody roots. And then, once you have it, and then while you're still out at your site, sort of pull apart the muck, and we'll rinse it off a little bit while we're out here. And then once we get back to the facility site, we'll hose off the roots to really wash them off, because we want to remove any predatory insects or anything that might be in the mud or in the roots, so that our beetles have the best chance of survival. And you'll see too that some of these plants have already started putting out their buds. So they've got little shoots at the base of the stem. And they start out red and then turn green as they get older. So just take care try not to break them when you're removing the plant. It's not the end of the world if they do break off. The plants recover pretty quickly, but once you get back to your facility, you want to just take a sprayer hose and wash off any remaining dirt and other muck that's on your roots. So just spray it off to wash it pretty thoroughly. So that's about as clean as what we're looking to get. And before you plant your roots, you want to fill your pots about 2/3 of the way full. We're just using sort of generic topsoil, nothing fancy. Then we'll mix in 1 scoop of indoor-outdoor slow-release fertilizer. And we're only putting it in the bottom 2/3 of the soil because the larvae descend into the top couple inches to pupate, and we don't want to negatively impact them at all with these extra nutrients. So you just mix it in, and you want to place your roots right on top. And since this one's a little small, we'll add a second root. And then we'll just cover them with more fertilizer-free topsoil and just gently pat it down around the roots. And when you're setting up your pools, you want to have all of your pots set up and placed in your pools before you add water, just so you don't risk washing all of the soil out once you put your pots into the pools. But when we're setting them up, we want them to have the most sun possible. Just sort of, we're trying to create the most ideal conditions for the plants. So at least 8 hours, but the more the better. In sort of greenhouse growing situations, they do a 16 light, 8 dark. So really as much light as you possibly can. So definitely keep that in mind.
And early light too.
Yeah.
Because we had them over there and they didn't get sunlight until 9:30 or 10 in the morning, and we thought that our development was a lot less than the plants in the field.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
So here we get sun at like 7:30. So that's right. So when you set them up, just kiddie pools, you can fit about 10 pots per pool. We started with 12 last year and then spread them out a little bit as the plants got larger to give them a little bit more room. And you'll notice they do have drain holes in them. Some are a little bit higher, but there's one here. You want to do about 3 to 4 inches from the base, because if it rains, you don't want the plants to get flooded. So that's another important thing. While you want the land to be as level as possible, if there's any sort of slope, if you only have drain holes on one end of the pool, make them downslope. Because otherwise, if you get a significant rain event, your plants will flood, and they'll tip sometimes and start floating. And that's not as critical early on when you don't have the beetles in there, but after you add the beetles, you don't want to risk drowning any larvae or pupa that are in the soil. So after we have planted the roots, we'll water them from the top just to saturate the soil as much as possible. Try to reduce transplant shock as much as we can. Keep them as happy as possible. And then we will fill the pools 2 to 3 inches deep. And then once you're monitoring the facility on more of a daily basis, you'll also want to check for that and keep track of water levels so that if you do get rain, you can bail out water if it gets really deep, or if it's really warm and dry, that your water doesn't all evaporate on you. So what we did last year is the first few weeks or so we continued to water from the top, especially if we weren't getting rain, just to make sure that the roots were as saturated as they could possibly be. But then we stopped doing that once we added the beetles. And they still get rained on, but we don't want to overdo